Here's something wild, Andrew. Andrew Jackson survived over a dozen duels, carried a bullet near his heart for 39 years, and still managed to completely transform American democracy. But his legacy, that's where things get really complicated.
That's such a fascinating way to look at Jackson Pappy, especially considering how his presidency marked this massive shift in American politics. The man they called Old Hickory literally fought his way to the top.
You know what's incredible about those duels? In his most famous showdown with Charles Dickinson, he actually let his opponent shoot first, took a bullet to the chest, and then calmly aimed and fired back. That bullet stayed lodged near his heart until the day he died.
Well, that certainly captures the essence of his character. His military prowess during the War of 1812 made him a national hero, particularly at the Battle of New Orleans.
Speaking of New Orleans, that battle is fascinating because it technically occurred after the war ended. His forces inflicted over 2,000 British casualties while losing only about 70 men. News traveled so slowly back then that neither side knew peace had already been declared.
Hmm. And that military fame really launched his political career. He completely changed the face of American politics.
Oh, absolutely. And here's where it gets fascinating. He created this whole new political movement called Jacksonian democracy. He eliminated property requirements for voting and pushed this radical idea that governments should be directly responsive to ordinary people. Well, common white men, that is,
That's where we get into the darker side of his presidency, particularly with the Indian Removal Act of 1830.
right? And the numbers are just devastating. The Cherokee Nation alone lost about 4,000 people on the Trail of Tears. And get this, the Cherokee had actually won their case in the Supreme Court, but Jackson basically said, John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it.
You know, that wasn't the only constitutional crisis he faced. The nullification crisis with South Carolina was another huge test of his presidency.
Oh man, that's such a fascinating moment because it really foreshadowed the Civil War. South Carolina threatened to nullify federal tariffs, and Jackson had to thread this incredibly delicate needle between maintaining federal authority and avoiding armed conflict with the state.
And then there's the whole bank war, which really shows how he could unite populist messaging with major policy initiatives.
The bank war is wild because of its massive economic consequences. He saw the second bank of the United States as this monster institution serving the wealthy, so he not only vetoed its recharter, but withdrew all federal deposits. It triggered a massive financial panic, but he still managed to frame it all as a fight for the common man.
Well, speaking of personal battles, what about the tragedy with his wife, Rachel? That really shaped his presidency.
Oh man, that's heartbreaking. Rachel died just before his inauguration, partly due to the stress of campaign accusations about their marriage. Jackson was so devastated that he wore a miniature of her portrait around his neck for the rest of his life. She was even buried in the wedding dress she had made for his inauguration.
That's such a human element to this larger than life figure. And then he introduced the spoils system, which completely changed the way government appointments were made.
You know what's fascinating about the spoil system? It perfectly encapsulates the contradictions of Jackson's presidency. He presented it as a democratic reform, opening government positions to ordinary citizens rather than the elite. But in practice, it created this whole new system of political patronage and corruption.
So many of these issues still resonate today. Questions about presidential power, populism, and economic inequality.
Even the controversy over his image on the $20 bill speaks to how we're still grappling with his legacy. Here's a man who expanded democracy while simultaneously being responsible for one of the worst human rights violations in American history. How do we reconcile that?
That's what makes studying history so complex. These figures aren't simply heroes or villains.
And maybe that's the most valuable lesson from Jackson's presidency, that progress and regression, democracy and authoritarianism can coexist in our political system. Understanding that complexity helps us better navigate our own political challenges today.
Well said, Pappy. His presidency really gives us a perfect lens through which to view these ongoing struggles in American democracy.
Andrew, and whether we're talking about populism, presidential power, economic inequality, or racial justice, many of the fundamental tensions Jackson dealt with are still very much with us today. The only question is how we'll handle them better than he did.